What happens when a tiny nation suddenly controls oil wealth big enough to redraw global power maps? In this video, we'll explore the shocking rise of Guyana's oil industry and why the United States might one day build a military base in this overlooked corner of South America. You'll learn how Guyana went from obscurity to strategic powerhouse, what a US base could mean for security, economics and sovereignty, and why the outcome might reshape an entire region. Picture this: Guyana, a quiet South American country with fewer than 1 million citizens, has suddenly discovered a treasure buried beneath its waters. Oil reserves so massive that they've catapulted it into the world's spotlight. In less than a decade, Guyana has transformed from an unknown economy into one of the fastest-growing nations on Earth. But with oil comes attention, and with attention comes power struggles. The United States, already deeply involved in Caribbean and South American security affairs, has been steadily strengthening ties with Georgetown. The question now is whether Washington could eventually establish a permanent military base there. To answer that, we need to understand why Guyana matters so much, what's already happening militarily, and the enormous risks and opportunities a US base would create. Since 2015, a series of discoveries in the Stabroek Block have rewritten Guyana's destiny. International oil giants, led by ExxonMobil and its partners, uncovered reserves estimated at more than 11 billion barrels. To put that in perspective, Guyana's oil reserves now rival those of countries that have been exporting petroleum for decades. Production has already exploded beyond 600,000 barrels per day, with projections suggesting output could reach 1.3 to 1.7 million barrels daily by the end of the decade. That's not just big for Guyana, it's monumental on the global stage. For comparison, that would place Guyana among the top 20 oil producers worldwide, competing with nations far larger and more politically influential. This sudden windfall has turned Guyana into a magnet for energy-hungry nations and corporate investors. But here's the catch: oil isn't just about money, it's about geopolitics. Whoever controls the flow of this black gold gains leverage in global power struggles. That's why Guyana's rise isn't just an economic story, it's a security story. Oil doesn't just fuel cars and factories, it fuels entire strategic rivalries. At first glance, the idea of the US establishing a base in Guyana might sound far-fetched. But in reality, the groundwork has already been laid. Over the past few years, Washington and Georgetown have been deepening their defense partnership in very visible ways. Take 2024, for example, when two American F/A-18F Super Hornets roared over the skies of Georgetown in a carefully coordinated flyover. It wasn't just a military stunt, it was a message, a signal to both friends and rivals that Guyana and the United States were aligning more closely than ever before. Since then, both countries have signed security agreements to expand intelligence sharing, strengthen maritime patrols, and improve military-to-military cooperation. Joint naval exercises in Guyana's exclusive economic zone have become increasingly routine, further cementing ties. This growing partnership is not accidental. Guyana sits in a neighborhood where tensions simmer, especially with neighboring Venezuela, which has long disputed Guyana's Essequibo region. By tightening military links, Washington not only strengthens Guyana's defenses, but also signals to Venezuela and other regional powers that any move against Guyana's oil riches won't go unchallenged. Did that 2024 flyover surprise you as much as it surprised the Guyanese watching from below? Now imagine what would happen if the United States went further. Not just flyovers, not just naval drills, but a full-fledged base on Guyanese soil. The impact would be immediate and dramatic. First, deterrence. Venezuela, which has repeatedly rattled sabers over the Essequibo dispute, would suddenly face the reality of a US military presence right next door. That alone could reduce the likelihood of armed conflict, since any Venezuelan aggression would risk a direct confrontation with Washington. Second, maritime security. Guyana's oil lies offshore, deep in the Atlantic. A US base would serve as a protective umbrella over those vital rigs, pipelines, and shipping routes. With billions of dollars of infrastructure floating on the waves, maritime security isn't optional, it's existential. Third, intelligence advantages. A base in Guyana would allow the United States to extend its surveillance capabilities across northern South America and the Caribbean. This isn't just about oil. It's about drug trafficking, illegal fishing, and monitoring the growing presence of rival powers like China and Russia in the region. But here's the catch. While all of this strengthens Guyana's hand, it also comes with strings attached. Washington doesn't establish bases lightly, and once it plants a flag, it rarely leaves without securing influence. Protection always comes at a price, and Guyana would have to decide if that price is worth paying. It's easy to think only in terms of tanks and jets, but bases change economies too. For Guyana, hosting a US installation would mean construction contracts, jobs, and massive upgrades to infrastructure. Ports might be expanded, airfields modernized, and new roads built to accommodate heavy military logistics. Local businesses, from catering to construction, would benefit from the inflow of US dollars. The promise of steady employment could transform some communities, especially in a country still struggling with poverty despite its new oil riches. Yet history shows us the darker side. These benefits are often temporary, and not everyone shares equally in the gains. Corruption can flourish when billions flow in without proper oversight. Worse still, economies can become dependent on foreign military spending. And when that support dries up, communities are left with half-finished projects and dashed hopes. On top of that, some investors might hesitate. While certain companies would feel reassured by the stability a US base brings, others, especially state-owned firms from rival powers, might see it as a red flag. Chinese companies already investing in Guyana's infrastructure could scale back, seeing the country as firmly locked into Washington's orbit. Would you accept foreign troops on your soil if it meant new jobs and better roads? Drop a yes or no in the comments. This brings us to perhaps the thorniest issue: sovereignty. For a small country, the decision to host a major foreign base is nothing short of a test of independence. On one hand, the security guarantees are undeniable. On the other, the optics can be explosive. Nationalists in Guyana could interpret the move as a new form of neo-colonialism, a reminder that even in the 21st century, small states can become pawns in the games of great powers. Then, there's the question of diplomatic balance. Guyana has been careful to court multiple partners, including China, which has financed projects across South America and shown keen interest in Guyana's energy sector. A permanent US base could push Beijing away, narrowing Guyana's diplomatic options. Finally, governance pressure. With so much global attention, every decision about how oil wealth is spent would come under the microscope. Transparency, anti-corruption, and fair distribution of wealth would be harder to ignore. For leaders, that kind of scrutiny can be both a blessing and a curse. These aren't abstract dilemmas. They've toppled governments in other oil-rich nations, and they could do the same here. Here's where things get complicated. A US base in Guyana could make the country safer in the short term, but less free in the long run. Why? Because once a powerful ally builds deep security infrastructure, unwinding it becomes nearly impossible. The host nation starts depending on foreign intelligence, foreign hardware, and foreign troops. Before long, its leaders realize that saying no to Washington carries higher risks than saying yes. Guyana could gain a shield against Venezuela's threats, but it would risk giving up some control over its maritime security, its foreign policy choices, and even aspects of how its oil wealth is managed. The paradox is stark. By seeking protection, Guyana could also be locking itself into dependency. That's why this story isn't just about oil or military bases. It's about the future of sovereignty in a world where small nations can suddenly hold resources too big for them to defend alone. Now, let's zoom out and look at the neighborhood. A US base in Guyana would send ripples across the Caribbean and South America, far beyond Georgetown's borders. Some neighboring nations might welcome it as a stabilizing factor, believing it could reduce the risk of regional conflicts. Others, however, could see it as dangerous escalation, a new flashpoint in an already complex geopolitical landscape. Take Trinidad and Tobago as a concrete example. Its leadership has already made public statements suggesting that Trinidad would permit US military use of its territory to defend Guyana if tensions with Venezuela escalated. That's not hypothetical. That's a realignment of regional logistics and security thinking. Suddenly, supply lines, military coordination, and even diplomatic messaging could shift overnight. Meanwhile, countries like Venezuela would perceive a base as a direct challenge to their influence. And beyond the immediate neighbors, powers like Brazil, Colombia, and even distant actors like China and Russia would adjust their policies. Strategic maps would be redrawn not with ink, but with alliances, military exercises, and investment decisions. Which country's reaction would shock you the most? Leave a guess in the comments. You might be surprised. To truly grasp what's at stake, imagine the Caribbean and northern South America as a giant chessboard. Each nation's moves are calculated, often quietly, but with consequences that ripple outward. Guyana's oil transforms it into a queen piece, valuable, mobile, and capable of influencing the positions of every other player. The United States, already accustomed to securing strategic choke points like Panama and Puerto Rico, would see Guyana as a critical new hub. The base could enhance US ability to monitor Atlantic shipping lanes, track illicit activities, and respond to regional crises rapidly. But here's the twist. With this added power comes added responsibility, and with responsibility comes added influence over the host country. Other powers are watching closely. China has invested billions in Caribbean and South American infrastructure, and Russian interests are quietly expanding in Latin America. Each reaction to Guyana's US alignment would influence how oil deals, trade agreements, and diplomatic negotiations unfold, sometimes in subtle ways, sometimes dramatically. On this chessboard, every move counts, and one misstep could reshape the balance of power in ways few anticipate. Let's take a closer look at the economic dimension. A US base would certainly inject capital into Guyana, generating construction jobs, service contracts, and ancillary industries. Roads would be improved, ports expanded, and local businesses might see opportunities they never imagined. These are tangible, real-world benefits that could improve lives almost immediately. But there's a cautionary tale in history. In countries where foreign military presence brings short-term economic windfalls, the long-term results can be mixed. Dependency on foreign spending can emerge, creating an economy that flourishes while the base is present but falters if the military leaves. Additionally, uneven distribution of benefits can fuel social tensions and resentment. Oil-rich nations like Angola, Nigeria, or even Brazil have faced similar dilemmas, where the promise of resource wealth clashes with domestic equity and governance challenges. Moreover, foreign military presence can shift the calculus for investors. Some international companies may feel reassured and expand operations, seeing a stable security environment. Others, especially firms backed by rival powers, may view the move as a geopolitical risk, potentially halting or reducing investment. The net effect? A landscape full of opportunity, yet shadowed by uncertainty. Would you take the short-term gains, knowing the long-term risks? Comment yes or no below. For policymakers in Georgetown, the decision to host a US base isn't just about economics or security. It's about legitimacy, public perception, and long-term survival. Every choice carries potential consequences for elections, party unity, and national stability. Popular backlash is a real threat. Many citizens, particularly those with nationalist leanings, could view the base as an infringement on sovereignty, a modern form of colonialism in disguise. If protests erupt or opposition parties seize the narrative, political leaders could find themselves navigating crises on multiple fronts. Diplomatic balancing acts are equally delicate. Guyana has courted multiple partners, from China's infrastructure investments to European energy collaborations. Closer alignment with Washington may satisfy security concerns, but it risks alienating other partners. Countries that were previously cooperative may now hesitate to engage fully, weighing the political optics against economic and security interests. Finally, domestic governance pressure would skyrocket. Oil wealth is a blessing, but also a potential trap if funds are mismanaged, or if citizens perceive favoritism, corruption, or inequitable distribution. The social and political fallout could be severe. Leaders must therefore carefully weigh immediate benefits against potential long-term political costs. This is the tightrope every oil-rich small nation must walk. The higher you climb, the more precarious your balance becomes. Here's the core paradox. A US base could dramatically increase Guyana's security in the near term, while simultaneously decreasing its strategic autonomy over time. Why does this happen? Once a major ally establishes deep infrastructure, intelligence networks, and operational logistics, disentangling becomes politically and practically costly. The host nation slowly becomes dependent on foreign support, whether in training, technology, or intelligence. Decisions about maritime security, oil governance, or even foreign policy moves can no longer be made in isolation. Guyana could gain protection against external threats, but it would also be gradually ceding leverage, sometimes subtly, sometimes overtly. In international affairs, perception matters as much as reality. A small state can appear secure while quietly losing bargaining power, especially in negotiations over trade, investments, or territorial disputes. Safety today can come at the cost of autonomy tomorrow. A dilemma that has shaped the histories of countries from Japan to South Korea, and now potentially Guyana. History offers cautionary examples. Countries that experience sudden resource booms often face a resource curse. Governments become targets for external powers, corruption can spike, and political instability may follow, sometimes destabilizing domestic politics. Or Venezuela, whose enormous energy reserves have been both a source of power and a lightning rod for crises. These examples show a recurring pattern. Sudden resource wealth draws global attention, and with it, a mix of opportunity and peril. Guyana is navigating this high-stakes environment carefully, but the addition of a US base could amplify every decision's impact. Policies would need to balance security guarantees, economic growth, and diplomatic flexibility. One miscalculation could tip the balance, creating a chain reaction with consequences beyond the nation's borders. Here's the most surprising part. The very infrastructure meant to protect Guyana could subtly limit its freedom. A US base doesn't just deliver jets, radar, and personnel, it creates deep interdependencies. Command, control, and intelligence networks mean that the host country gradually relies on the foreign ally for strategic decisions it might otherwise make independently. The irony is striking. By inviting protection, Guyana could enhance short-term security while planting the seeds of long-term dependence. Every naval exercise, intelligence sharing agreement, and joint operation adds layers of obligation. Extracting from this arrangement later would not only be politically delicate, but potentially economically and militarily costly. In other words, what looks like a simple choice for protection is actually a profound gamble, a test of sovereignty, strategy, and foresight. The oil-rich nation is caught between immediate safety and enduring independence, a classic dilemma for small states sitting atop resources that global powers desire. To summarize, Guyana's oil boom has transformed it from a small, quiet country into a strategic hotspot. The US is deepening military ties, and a base could provide unmatched security, economic benefits, and regional influence. Yet every advantage comes with strings attached: political scrutiny, diplomatic trade-offs, potential dependency, and reduced autonomy. Guyana faces a pivotal choice: embrace short-term security with long-term constraints, or navigate a more complex, self-reliant path. If this deep dive gave you new insights into the complex world of geopolitics, oil, and sovereignty, hit like and subscribe. I publish in-depth analyses like this every week. Want to go further? Share your thoughts below on whether Guyana should host a US base or find alternative security solutions. And don't forget to send this to a friend who follows global energy, geopolitics, or South American affairs. They'll thank you for the inside perspective.